Hello, Soul Spiralers. Welcome back to today's podcast episode. Today I have Eloise Fielke here. She is a psychic and mediumship development teacher, a reader, a kinesiologist like myself, a shamanic practitioner, and she is amazingly insightful and on point with her intuitive abilities and the way that she holds space for others. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Ellie.
Thank you so much for having me, Kristin. Such an honor and a pleasure to be here.
I love how spontaneous this recording has been as well. I love when it flows like that.
Yep. Lockdown over New Year's. What better thing to do?
That's it. What better? I was like, you want to come and have a podcast with me if you're in lockdown? I'm so excited to have you on, Eloise. And you and I met through women's circles and our shamanic energy training teachings that you have delved much, much deeper into than I have. But it's so amazing to have connected. And you're down in Vic. Are you in Wonga Park?
Yes, so right behind Warrandyte.
Oh, so good. And that's where I was living when I was down in Vic recently.
Oh,
I was being so close to you, but then you moved closer.
Yeah, so I moved right closer when you left.
Yeah, I remember.
I'm following you up north.
Yeah, come follow me again. When I used to hike Mount Lofty, I'd like look out and I could see your house that you were renting, and I'd always be with my friend. I'm like, there's Eloise's house.
Yeah, right across the river.
Yeah, such a beautiful spot, such a beautiful part of the world, that area. I like. If I was to be in Melbourne, I'd definitely be there because it's just so beautiful.
Yeah, best part of Melbourne for sure.
Yeah. I wanna ask, I don't even know if I've ever asked you this. How did you get into psychic development and mediumship?
Great question. So it's one of those things where everyone says this, so it's ironic, but it kind of just happened.
Yeah.
In the sense that I went through my big health journey, which I would also call my spiritual awakening, when I was 21 and had chronic fatigue for a couple of years and a lot of health issues going on. And I was led to Sharon, and she was treating me as a kinesiologist and shamanic practitioner, and she was really helping where I was at, and she was running ceremonies. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to go to one of these ceremonies and I'm going to start doing Qigong because that might lift my energy levels. And I went to my first cacao ceremony, and it was like nothing I'd ever done before. It was very new to me. And in that process, I just knew I had to start psychic development.
Yeah.
And throughout chronic fatigue, I'd noticed my body get more and more sensitive. I'd noticed myself picking up on energy more, but I didn't know that that's what I was doing at the time, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so it was a whole new experience, and I was like, what's wrong with me? I even went and got my eyes checked and then my vision was perfect. And so I noticed those energetic shifts and sensitivities start switching on. And then in that cacao ceremony, I just knew it was time, and I met someone there that said, come and do psychic development with me and my teacher, Benjamin. And so then began a long 5.5-year journey with Benjamin Veens. So I love to honor my teachers as well. So honoring Benjamin Veens, my psychic and mediumship development teacher, who has literally gotten me to where I am today.
So cool. What do you feel like, you know how you're saying that you had your eyes checked, was that kind of the first sort of aspect that switched on for you? Is that more clairvoyant side of things, or you were delving into more other things were coming through and then you were noticing it through clairvoyance?
Oh, I would say everything at once, because when you're going through chronic fatigue, and anyone listening that's been through it will understand and feel this as well, that the sensitivity all switches on at once. So I just felt everything and felt really overwhelmed by big crowds or people that were really emotional or lots going on around me, just so overwhelmed feeling wise. My ears were so sensitive that if I was in a small room or a car and someone was talking loudly, they would hurt. They would literally ache. And then the eyes as well, looking up at the sky, looking at white walls, I could just see all the shadows everywhere and the different colors and the metallic colors and kind of the frequency behind everything, instead of, you know, what we see 3D and what we're used to seeing. So I literally thought something was really wrong with me because I didn't know anything about psychic development or energetic teachings or spirituality or any of it. And so I literally went to the optometrist and was like, something is wrong with my vision. So it was everything at once. But I will say, for me, and everyone has a different journey with opening up to their psychic senses and intuition. For me, it was more so the physical senses that got really sensitized, and then the psychic development was a bit easier. But at the same time, in saying that, when I started psychic development, I wasn't the world's best psychic, if that makes sense. So it's one of those things where you go to psychic development to develop your psychic senses. And so I still had to train, and I still got things wrong, and I still struggled with certain levels as well. But it was just that energetic sensitivity and opening up, as well as just that inner knowing, which is claircognizance, that psychic sense of knowing, that I had to start psychic development when I went to this cacao ceremony.
Amazing. What's the difference between physical senses and psychic senses?
So essentially, the physical senses are the 5 senses that we perceive life through, and they're related to our physical body and senses and things that we're physically experiencing, if that makes sense. So it's less on that energetic level and more on the physical level. So example, for taste, you're physically tasting chocolate, and so you can taste it in your mouth. But if you're working with a psychic sense of taste, which is clairgustation, that's when you won't be physically eating that chocolate, but you might be connecting in with a spirit on a mediumship level who loved chocolate, and you might start tasting chocolate. Or they might have smoked, so you might start having that taste after you've had a cigarette of smoke in your mouth. And so that's where it's energetic, because you haven't physically done it. You haven't physically connected with that thing. So it's the same with all the psychic senses. They're energetic, whereas all the physical senses, they're very physical. So it will be that physical cause and effect. You touch something, you feel it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's almost like that aspect of like, there's a veil, and there's like the one side is all the physical, but the other side has all the mirroring senses that are more psychic versions of them. Completely,
because it is very much mirrored in the energetic realms. And so that's where it's just a more subtle frequency attunement, so to speak, to the energetics behind the physical. But it is definitely a mirror, just like how our lower 3 chakras or energy centers, whatever you wish to call them, mirror our upper 3 energy centers and chakras as well.
Yeah, so true. Are there any extras that come into like the psychic senses and psychic abilities though?
Not so much. More so when I teach psychic development, we still focus on the 7 main chakras and energy centers that go up the spine. So the 7 major ones that are connected to the physical body. They're the most important in terms of opening your energy up and developing your energy on a psychic level.
And so I know that you have been doing a lot of work with intuition. Would you say that that's just the reflection of working with those energy bodies and those energy centers?
Vice versa, and both, if that makes sense.
Okay.
When you work on a particular psychic sense, the 3 main ones that I teach on is clairsentience, clairaudience, and clairvoyance. And they almost always relate to a specific energy center or chakra. And so in that sense, when they relate to that specific chakra, so clairsentience is related to the solar plexus, clairaudience to the throat chakra, clairvoyance to the 3rd eye. And so you can work on that psychic sense in terms of psychic development, in terms of focusing your energy on opening up that psychic sense. But I will say you always want to do it in a grounded, safe way, because sometimes people can open up too quickly and it can be destabilizing. But you can work on opening up that psychic sense, and it will also help develop that energy center, because there's energy going there, so to speak, right? So where your mind goes, energy follows. So if you're focusing on that sense, you're also opening up that energy center. So you will have the lessons of that energy center, or things that are repressed or stuck within that energy center, come to the surface in the forefront as you move through your lessons.
Mm-hmm.
Vice versa as well. If you want to open up a certain psychic sense, then you can also focus on a chakra and energy center level on the chakra that's associated with it. So if I wanted to open up my clairaudience from a really grounded perspective, because this is where you can really ground these little practices into your everyday life, then you can focus on the throat chakra. The more you're opening that up, the more energy is unblocking and releasing and building there. The more power that's building, the easier it's going to be to connect in with your clairaudience because they're so deeply connected.
I love that. That's such a cool, grounded sort of approach to being able to work with those psychic senses. So would claircognizance be your heart chakra then, even though that's not technically what you mainly teach? Is that what claircognizance falls into?
Claircognizance is a really interesting one where it actually kind of falls under a few, I believe.
Yeah.
There's different schools of thought on this,
Mm-hmm.
but there's actually, I see it more so connected to clairaudience or clairsentience,
Mm-hmm.
so the throat chakra or the solar plexus chakra, because it's almost this idea that when we feel something, it's just that deeper level when we know something. But that's where on that level, I can see it as sometimes related to the crown and sometimes to the heart as well. But more so I see it very deeply connected to clairsentience and solar plexus.
So interesting.
That gut knowing, right? People speak about the gut. And that gut knowing, that's your gut, right? So when you look at where that is in the body, that's connected to your sacral or your solar plexus. That's where our gut is, and that's what organs are associated with those chakras. And so I do see it as very closely related, but I've been taught from teachers as well that clairaudience is similar to claircognizance in terms of the throat chakra, and claircognizance being closely related to the throat chakra, but not just associated with the throat chakra. So it's a bit of an anomaly, that one, so to speak.
The reason I ask is because that's my main clair that comes through, is that knowing. And whenever I tap into that knowing, it comes from my heart. And I often find that with my clients too. It's like, well, what does your heart want? And your heart knows. The Heart Math Institute have done a lot of work and research into heart space and how it knows before anything else. So I was like, oh, maybe it's here.
Yeah, and it very well could be. It's different for everyone, as well as there's many schools of thought. Yeah. And it's not just associated with one particular energy center.
True. You were talking about the clairsentience and the solar plexus and that feeling sense and feeling sensitive to the world even makes me think of when people become so sensitive to the world, they perhaps like shut that down and don't allow that to flow. Is that something that you notice or you witness?
Yeah, in terms of some people become so sensitive to the world that it's quite overwhelming.
Yeah.
This can happen anytime throughout our life. So this can happen when we're children, because as babies and toddlers and animals, they just read energy. And then we slowly start to close ourselves down through society and the way society teaches us to be. And, you know, the idea that energy isn't really taught on or isn't really real until we come to that belief ourselves later in life. We start to put on those layers, so to speak. But sometimes you might have a really sensitive awakening or opening, such as my experience with chronic fatigue. So that might happen throughout your teenage years or your 20s or your 30s or your 40s or later in life as well. And that's when you can become incredibly sensitive to everything. And some people go, okay, I need to go and learn more and get support and help and guidance with this, because I don't teach psychic development until there's certain energy management, psychic protection, and grounding tools in place. It's so important to have that, or you are just going to get overwhelmed and knocked around by energy if you're opening up your clairs. And it can be destabilizing because you've got to know yourself as well. And so that's why there's so much self-development that's a part of psychic development. Because if you don't know yourself, then you can get knocked off of your center really easily. So some people might go down that route, but some people might feel overly sensitive and just try and close it down as much as they can. So you can see this a lot in people's teenage years and 20s, when people start numbing with drugs, which is a catch-22, right? Because lots of mind-altering substances actually open us up more, open our energy fields up more, and can cause holes in our energy field, which means we're going to be more sensitive to the world around us because we don't have that solidity in our energy field. And so it can be a catch-22, but it can numb you for a little bit, and then the cycle repeats itself. But you also do notice, instead of going down that route, some people just close it off as much as they can, just try and ignore it to the best as they can. So you might see people become a bit disassociated as well from their body. So they're not feeling everything in terms of their own stuff, but also energy and stuff from people around them. And that's when I do notice in a lot of people that come to me to train as well, people might be quite scared.
Yeah, I was thinking fear. Fear would have been a key thing, wouldn't it?
Key. It is the most common thing I speak to people that are thinking of studying with me or people that are training with me about, is fear of opening up, especially people who have had those spirit experiences when they were younger, when they were toddlers or kids or teenagers, and didn't have the support and tools that they needed. And it was quite shunned and very taboo to speak about. So, you know, just like, and there's nothing wrong with this because this is what we're taught, but just like how our parents say, oh, that's your imaginary friend. Usually it's a spirit guide, right? Because we're quite open. And so not having the support that they need at that time, it becomes scary. So when they're an adult, that can still play out, going, no, if I open up, I'm going to lose control. I'm not going to have support. It's going to be too much. What if I can't close it down? And so that's one of the main questions I get asked. There's two things. One is, what if I open up and it's too much and I can't close it down and my life is ruined, right?
Yeah.
And the other side of the coin is the self-doubt. What if I can't do it? Because I have that a lot as well. What if I do psychic development and nothing comes through and I can't do this? And it's that fear of failure and rejection, right? And that's where, on that note, I always say to people, I've taught many students now and I've never seen anyone not able to read.
Yeah.
There's specific templates and structures and language that I teach. So it's not ambiguous and out there. It's a specific set structure. And you just go, what am I seeing here? What's happening there? And ways to interpret what's coming up. And so you get two sides of the same coin, if that makes sense. So it's a big one. And that's where, with the fear of opening up, that's why I teach from the ground up, and I focus on the base energy center, the root chakra first, with the grounding, energy management, and psychic hygiene tools, protections, etc. So that people can be reminded that they're in control.
Yeah,
Because
I love that.
that's a big thing as well, the self-responsibility with this, and going, okay, cool, I've got to be on top of my energy if I want to open up safely, and I can't do that for you. And I always remind people that here are the tools. I can't do them for you, but they're all here. It's up to you if you want to do them. And so that's a big part of it as well as I like to work with, because of the work that I've done with Sharon, and you've studied with Sharon and done various courses with her as well. She brings a lot of ritual into her work. And so I've done quite a bit of training with her in plant work and ceremony and ritual and magic, all that sort of stuff. So I like to bring that in at the start of psychic development and do a ceremony where we are opening up the group, but also starting to work through our limiting beliefs around psychic development and our intuition, and reclaiming that.
I love it. It sounds so amazing.
Big tangent.
Oh no, I love it. And it makes so much sense. Sharon's so good at teaching that work in such a grounded way and really claiming it for people to have self-responsibility on that, sort of on your energy and on your grounding. Like, because, you know, when you're talking about when you're a child, I was so afraid of ghosts. And I think it was more so that I didn't know if it was real. And that was what was making me so scared. I thought that, oh, is someone going to think I'm weird? You know, so metal of me in Chinese medicine. Is someone going to reject me if you'd admit that I'm so afraid of these things and I notice these things? And even a similar thing with aliens. And it's funny, like the more that I just listened to people talking about those things, it's a matter of fact kind of way, it made me more able to deal with that. But then also Sharon's approach of how to be grounded and know that you're in control. yeah, I think it's so powerful to learn those things, because it's a side of us that we all have that we lock away.
Yeah, we are all psychic. So that's the other one with the self-doubt. I
Yeah.
love to debunk myths where people always go, I haven't had these big awakening experiences, or I don't see spirits, what if nothing comes through? And I love to remind people that we're all psychic. Every single one of us, no matter how scientific you are, we all have those abilities.
Yeah.
None of us don't possess that. As humans, we have that. So it's just remembering that part of us, which I love to remind people of. But I totally hear what you're saying as well, because it's so taboo, these topics, or they were. I will say, moving into this age of Aquarius, a lot of people are opening up. And like you said, a lot of people are speaking about psychic development, intuition, aliens, spirits, ghosts, all that sort of stuff, really matter of fact now.
Yeah.
And so it's quite an interesting shift that we're seeing happen. But, maybe even not long ago, a few years ago, it was still quite taboo. And especially when we were younger and having that conditioning and putting those layers upon ourselves and our intuition, it was very taboo, especially because of religion and how it's all been painted with mediumship being the devil's work and ghosts and all that sort of stuff and what that means. But really, I like to see it as a beautiful gift, right? Mediumship is such a gift. If you can bring proof of life after death to someone that's grieving, then I see it as there's no greater gift.
Definitely.
So, yeah.
I mean, I fully believe that this life isn't that we don't just have this life. And from my own experiences and from experiences reading through other people's experiences, that affirms that as well. And I think it's like, Alex and I always talk about this. We need to have faith in our lives, whether that's a religion or whether that's a belief system where it allows us to feel free to be living in a way. I think it shapes us to be more whole as humans when we have that faith. And this type of work that you're discussing, it's exactly having that faith in yourself and having that faith in the higher, greater universe, purpose, world, whatever you want to call it.
Because it's all different ways of speaking about the same thing, right? Exactly. Religion, spirituality, all of that sort of stuff, it's all, when you really get to the root of it, it's the same thing. It's that having faith in something that's greater than us.
Yeah.
And there might be different dogmas and different rules or standards and, different ways of seeing things. But when you really break it down, it's very similar.
Yeah, so true. What has been your favorite part of your intuition to develop?
My favorite part of my intuition to develop has actually been, this is a fun little side one that I haven't intended to, but it kind of just happens through psychic development, is the funny bits of telepathy that happen between you and your partner.
I love that.
So you'll be thinking something and they'll say it, or you'll both say the same thing at the same time, or you'll be thinking of something really random that no one would guess, and then they put on that exact song. Those sorts of things, and you're like, okay, cool.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Alex and I do that too. I love that.
I love it. Those really tangible examples that happen where we're like, okay, we can't make that up. Like that is 1 in a million. So cool.
Yeah.
So there's real physical examples, because even though I teach this stuff, I'm still skeptical, and I think it's important to have a healthy level of skepticism.
Yeah. So you can be surprised as well, because one of the best things in life is being surprised by these sorts of things as well.
100%. And then it's that bonus of like, oh, okay, cool. This stuff is real. You can't make this stuff up.
Yeah.
And so I love that part. But the part that I actually really had to work and try to develop was the audience. That wasn't a natural level for me. And this is debunking more myths around psychic development that, your dominant sense is your dominant sense, and that's it. And that's how it is for the rest of your life. You can train yourself to have whatever dominant psychic sense you want.
Yeah.
And so for me, I wasn't very good at clairaudience when I started psychic development. I really struggled. I'd have next to nothing come through, maybe a word, tiniest little bit, and I'd really struggle and be like, I think I was making all of that up. And so I was like, I'm going to focus on this level. And so I practiced on friends and did homework and brought in readings to my teacher and all that sort of stuff because I was committed and wanted to develop clairaudience because it was just such a beautiful level, I thought. And that's where I say to anyone, you can really choose what level you want to focus on and expand. You've just got to put in the time, energy, discipline, and practice. So it's all up to you. And that's where the self-responsibility piece comes in. And so with that, that's where the more I focus on it and hone in on that psychic sense, the more it opened up. And now that's the level I mostly work on for readings. And I totally admit to all my students, to everyone, I'm a lazy reader, right? So I'm not a huge symbolic person, so to speak. And I still find it fascinating and definitely teach on it, etc. But it's not the main way I read because I don't think in those terms. I'm very literal sometimes. So I want the information to come through as is without having to figure anything out. So for me, clairaudience is perfect because I just say it word for word as it's coming through. So that's been the coolest part, to also show myself, oh, wow, if I put my mind to this and practice, I can do it. So that's also a message for anyone else that doubts themselves.
Definitely. I feel like mine is that I need to develop the most is clairvoyance. And I did have a teacher where she talked a lot about references. And I think that's what you're saying, like with the symbolism in clairvoyance, is often they use a lot of references or symbolism in clairvoyance. It's not, you're not seeing it exactly as it is. It's kind of like coming through as, what would that picture mean to you? And then interpreting that. Is that correct?
Yeah, so that's one of the levels of clairvoyance. So this is where I love how broad and vast this world really is, where we actually can work subjectively, which is where we work with symbolism and we see it in a certain way. And then you're working with the symbolism and you can create your own, or you can go off lists of symbolism that I give to my students as well. And they can go off of that because that's
so like you're learning a language.
Like you're learning a language, literally. That's what psychic development is. And so that creates a base, a solid structure that then you can build upon. And then go, okay, this is like that, or that means this to me. And so you can work on that level. And that's one of the best ways to start opening up your clairvoyance. That's usually where I'll start my students off because it's easier to connect to, because it's similar to meditation. When you're visualizing and meditating, you're using your clairvoyance, your third eye, subjectively, internally. And then after a while of deepening and developing that, then you can start to work on a more objective level where we interpret things in a different way. And then eventually, after working on an objective level for a while, you can start seeing into people's lives. And so that's where you're seeing directly into what's going on. And you can see directly into the future if they choose that timeline, I will say, because there's always choice and free will. So many timelines, and I always remind people of that. So there is that aspect as well. So you can work subjectively with symbolism, or you can work objectively once you've trained to that level and start seeing into people's lives as it is, which is a really, really cool skill and gift to have as well. And some people are quite natural with that, and some people it takes a bit longer. But again, it's just like clairaudience and my journey with that, where the more you work on that level, the more you can open that up.
I need to focus on that, definitely. We spoke about timelines there for a second. I want to go down that a little bit, because Alex and I often we talk to each other. We make a decision on something and we're like, oh, imagine if we'd made the other decision. That's obviously a different timeline that we did make that other decision. Have you ever witnessed you've given a reading to someone and then you've given them a reading very soon after or something, and their timeline shifted very drastically?
Yeah, it really just depends. And so I always say to people at the start of every reading that for any future information, there can be so many different timelines that play out.
Yeah.
And so with that, that's where it really just depends on your own choice and free will. And so you also get to decide what happens in your life. There is, a big aspect that might be fate, that might be how it's meant to be. So maybe, we could get really esoteric here and go, how much really is in our control though. But we are under the guise that we do have that choice and free will. And we do, right, to choose, because you can choose to take on board the information from the reading, or you can choose not to as well.
Yeah.
And so that's where it's one of those things where sometimes, and that's why I remind people at the start, because if I don't remind them of having their own choice and free will and being self-responsible in that, then I could be collapsing someone's timeline, because I say, this is it, this is what's happening, and nothing else can happen. So they might focus on that and make that happen. Or they might not make any other choice because they don't feel like they have any choice in the matter. And so that's why I say that as well. So I'm very careful with my language and say it's always up to you.
So important. So important.
It's one of those things where sometimes you could be focusing on a specific timeline if they make that one big choice.
Yeah.
But if they go, you know what, I'm not ready to make that choice, different things might happen. Or the timeline can shift, and sometimes similar things will happen that came through in the reading, but at a later date. Does that make sense?
Definitely.
So shift when it comes in as well.
Or I've had instances where either you or someone else has given me a reading and they've given me an answer, and I've been like, oh yeah, it's this, attached to the thing, making it attached to the thing that I wanted it to be. And it has come out to be true, but it's been a different perspective of that same thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, completely. Because sometimes you'll be talking about something from an energetic perspective. So you'll automatically go, oh, it's this. It's this area of my life. It's this thing that's happening. That's what's going to come in. And then it's something totally different, but it fits the description and makes sense, but you weren't open to that possibility at the time.
Yeah, it's interesting. I love that you give that preface at the beginning of readings. And I think it's so important, because I have friends that have had readings and maybe gotten so fixated on what has been said that they disempower themselves through what's happening in their reality. But I think it's funny. There's something that you told me when you gave me a reading, I think this time last year, or at the start of, was it the start of the year?
Yeah, it might have been a year or a year and a half ago.
No, I was up here already. So I think it must have been, like about a year ago. And we were talking about babies, and you said to me November. And but you didn't give me a year. So I'm still curious to see what happens in November. Like, November's past, but it's funny. I was reflecting on this before we got on the call, and, Alex and I on this conscious conception journey together, and we did make a decision about something in November, which is funny. Like, we didn't fall pregnant or have a child in November, but we did make a decision about something in November to do with that. And then I'm like, oh, it could still be next November. There could be a baby, something arriving.
And it's one of those things where stay open, but
exactly.
It might be that you made the decision.
Yeah.
It might be that you conceive in November. It might be that the baby's here by November. It's one of those things that's open.
Yeah.
But they just bring through important times, so to speak. But those timelines can shift too. So it's very important to stay open and not try and fit everything.
Stay curious. Yeah. I'm going on about life, but it's in the back of my mind, like, oh, is it going to be something with this?
And that's the best way to go about it. Like, just curiosity and fun and openness.
I have a funny one though. I had this beautiful lady, Audrey, that I did a lot of my original intuition development with. She gave me a reading right before I quit my corporate job in the bank. And I was really wanting to get made redundant so I get a payout. Yeah. Because I'd worked there for 6.5 years.
Yeah.
And I was having this reading with her, and I was, do you see anything? Do you see anything with this? And she's like, oh, like I see a number with 7 at the end of the year. And I was like, 7? She's, yeah, like 7 something. And I was like, oh, 7,000, 70,000, trying to get fixed on this thing. And she was, I think she was obviously not getting, like, I was clouding her like in that moment, because I was like, wanted it to be something else. Anyway, I ended up leaving the bank, and then they stuffed up my pay on my second last pay, which was right at the end of that year. It wasn't my final payout, but my second last pay was only $700.
Yeah.
And it was so funny because it was right at the time that I'd left, and it was the last payment of that year, but it wasn't the number I was hoping for when she was giving me the reading, but it was the number that happened.
Yeah. And that's how it can happen, right?
Yeah.
That's what works in weird and wacky ways.
So weird. It's so funny. But yeah, fortunately I had other money come through on my final payout after I'd left the bank, but still I didn't get $70,000. That's for sure.
And that's where, right, always open to interpretation, because 700.00, right?
Yeah. I think that's why she was, is it?
Yeah. And so it could have looked like that if you didn't notice that little dot. Right?
Yeah.
So it just depends as well.
So interesting. I love it. I remember when this would have been years ago, and we were in the rose garden at the Botanic Gardens and you were giving me a reading. Do you remember this?
Yes, that was the first time I read for you.
Yeah, and you were practicing all your different, like, you would stop and be like, okay, now I'm going to do clairaudience, and stop, and then now I'm going to do clairsentience. And I just loved witnessing that process that you were going through. Is that generally how you teach people to kind of read to begin with as well?
Yes, so that's exactly how I teach, because if I were to say, okay, here's all the symbolism, here's all the stuff for all the different levels, see what happens, you're just going to default to the level you're most comfortable with most of the time. And you're not going to deepen the levels that you're not comfortable with, right? So I do notice I really hold my students to the levels that we're focusing on. So the way I teach now is a month on each clair, the three main clairs that I teach on. And so we really hone in on that clair, on the language and how to interpret it and what that looks like and how you receive it. So you get used to integrating it into your physical body because you're speaking another language. And so there is that aspect. But I notice, say, with some of my students that are really clairsentient naturally, they're feelers, right?
Yeah.
When we're in clairaudience month and we're just focusing on hearing, they'll continuously be like, I feel this, I feel that. And I'll be like, what level are we working on? Because you'll naturally default to that because it's easier. And so information comes through there a lot easier. So why I'm really strict with the language and focusing on one level at a time is so that it can open up and has a chance to open up. And so that's where your power lies as well, in going, okay, I want to focus here, I want to focus there. And so I do teach people that way, and it's a while until you start really integrating it together. Once the psychic senses and levels are really integrated and you know what level you're working on and how to interpret that, etc., and then you can start merging them all because you know what's happening, so to speak. So it really expands the psychic levels the more you focus on one at a time.
Yeah, I love that. I have some people that I know, or clients that I know, that they can't visualize in meditation and they can't see. And I always ask them, do you dream? Because if they dream, they have the ability. But sometimes if they feel like there's a block there because they can't visualize anything in meditation, how do you usually deal with that with people a similar way?
That's one of those things where you've got to start using your imagination. And so when people are struggling, it's, if you were to imagine visualizing something, what's the first thing you imagine? And so you start working with your imagination in that way. But at the same time, when it's to the point where you're not able to meditate and visualize in that way, then you might start needing to close your eyes and just go, I'm going to imagine a red apple. And so you start imagining that and visualizing what that would look like. And you might even, if you're really struggling to even visualize that, then you might see the red apple first and physically have it in front of you, and then close your eyes and then try and recreate that in your mind's eye. So you're starting to work with visualizations and images, etc. But at the same time, there's a whole multitude of reasons why that could be happening that might need to be addressed as well. So it might be a belief, it might be a block, it might be an energetic block, it might be an ancestral thing, it might be negative energy that might be affecting the third eye. It just depends. The list goes on. It might be calcification, it might be energetic, it might be physical, it might be just the way your brain works. But I will say I've never had a student that hasn't been able to do a specific level.
I love that.
So you can always train yourself.
Yeah, for sure. As part of the training, do you get people to visualize things in their own mind and then you trying to read what they're visualizing?
That is another way to do it.
Is that more telepathic?
That can be telepathy, usually.
Yeah.
But at the same time, thoughts are things. So if you're working on a clairvoyant level, it can cross over, so to speak. But I will say that is down the track, because at the start, I don't want people who are first starting to explore and develop, who have a bit of self-doubt, patterning and programming and thoughts going on, to do that for one of their first practices and then go, oh my God, I can't do this. And then do it. So I teach the way to read and the template to read and how to interpret the information, the language and the level that we're working on. And then from there, usually at the start, I'll say you don't need to give feedback. Right? So at the start, it's actually not about getting it right. even though this is a good template, will really, really help with accuracy. And so it's not about being right. It's about just practicing doing it and receiving information and seeing what happens, to go, oh, I can receive information. Oh, I can do this. And then I do find, especially now that I work online mostly and do psychic development online, now people will be in their breakout rooms together. So I put everyone into their own separate rooms with a partner to read for each other, so they get more time reading. And I'll notice that people will be so moved to share what's, you know, how that resonated and how that makes sense. And so that will start happening anyway. And then people will be like, oh my God, I can do this. Like, I can't believe that. Because people won't be able to hold it in and will be like, oh my God, this makes perfect sense because this, this and this. And so there's nothing wrong with that either. But at the start, I always say to people, you don't have to give feedback straight away. It's not about going, yep, that made sense. This didn't, blah, 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 blah. That comes later, when you've integrated the senses a bit more and we're going deeper and we're going, okay, cool. Where's your accuracy at now?
More organic sort of process.
Just to help with the self-doubt, you need to trust. You got to take baby steps at first.
Amazing. I love it.
Yeah.
What about, you know, I think what I used to be afraid to, it's all related to me at the end of the day here. Me, I did this, I did that. I'm just like, all the curious questions, of course, but I'm sure other people have them too. But I remember when things like this were more taboo and people talked about psychic readings, but I was like, I don't want to go to a psychic reading because what if they tell me something bad? What is your experience with this, or what is the way? Do you ever notice things that are, let's perceived negative that come up, or something that maybe the person doesn't want to hear? How do you navigate that, and what do you do?
It's a really good question, and my students ask me this a lot as well. It's one of those things where usually spirit won't give you information that's not meant to be shared. But at the same time, if it's very direct and very full on and very deep, then you do want to check, where is this exactly coming from? And does this need to be shared? And then if it's a yes, then you share it in a really gentle way. So that's where later on in development, I start teaching different ways to word things that are a bit gentler. So you're not saying full on things to people and going, that's that. But I will say spirit usually won't give you information such as, you know, you're going to die at this age, or this person's going to die then, and blah, blah, blah. They won't do that, because then you're going to freak out and fixate on that thing and either focus on that one timeline, or it's going to really negatively impact you emotionally. And so there is a certain level of life sometimes has to happen the way it happens, but we're not meant to know it all before it happens. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. Have you read Life Between Lives by
I haven't. I'm not a big reader, I will say.
Well, it reminds me of what his experience. This book is about therapy and past life regressions, but he started doing between life regressions when he realized that a client got regressed to that point. And I think that in that book by Brian Weiss, Many Lives, Many Masters, he touches on that sort of stuff as well. But when Newton is trying to gather information from this between lives thing, it takes a while for him to actually even extract information about our lives' purposes and our soul's purposes here, because it's obviously part of his soul purpose is to share that information because it needed to be shared, but it was almost like a process for him to only access a certain amount by a certain point and a certain amount by a certain point, and even to get information sometimes he couldn't get it. So I find it's a similar thing. We are woken up with amnesia when we're birthed for a reason. Like, if we were meant to know it all, wouldn't we know it all when we were birthed?
And so that's where I do believe that spirit give us what we're meant to know at the time. So you're not going to know everything. So
true. I love it. And we can't know everything because that would take the fun out.
It's too much.
But over the claircognizant in me is like, what? Can't I know everything?
I know. We want to as humans, but we don't need to as souls.
Yeah, so true. Have you noticed any certain patterns? Like, you know how you said that for some people their main clair that comes through is clairaudience, or for some it's more clairvoyance, or some clairsentience. Do you notice that there's any, you know, with astrology or constitutions in Chinese medicine, or even Pitta, Vata, Kapha, all of that sort of stuff? Do you know that there's certain types of people that tend to be more this one versus that one, or it's just so random with what you've
It's
noticed?
not random, so to speak, but I can't give you a clear answer on that because I don't know everyone's astrological sign before they join or their elemental constitution from the Bagua. So I'm sure if I started looking at that and cross-referencing, I might see a pattern. But at the same time, you notice from people's language. So if they're always feeling, and I feel this and I feel that, or for you, your language would be, I know this, I know that, I know blah, 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 then that's when it gives you a big clue as to their dominant sense at this point before doing further development on the other ones. But your dominant sense can always change.
Yeah, okay. So it could change intermittently through your life. Just yours was originally, what was yours originally? Sentient?
Clairvoyance and
voyance, yeah.
Clairaudience.
It's funny that you say the people that say, oh, I feel, I see, or whatever. I, in session with clients, always say, I'm hearing. So it's, maybe my dominant is actually clairaudience, because I thought it was, but I did this workshop with this lady and like claircognizance is what I heard.
Yeah.
And I definitely think I have a big aspect of that. Yeah. But yeah, it's interesting that you just pointed that out. I'm like,
and it can be two, it can be multiple. Yeah. But if you're using I'm hearing a lot, then there's probably some clairaudience going on as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's very noisy in there.
Yeah, and you really notice it in your client sessions as well, because that's when you'll be using language.
And I feel that's the most safe in the way when I want to express, because I'm often like seeing and feeling as well, but I feel the most safe when I say I'm hearing.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's like, it feels like a safe area for me to like communicate from.
Yeah, completely. Because claircognizance can be a bit more ambiguous at times. So it can be a bit scarier. So clairaudience is probably your other dominant sense that feels a bit more comfortable to work with.
Yeah. And and claircognizance can be too definitive. If I'm like, I know this, people be like, oh my God. Or it feels gentle to say, I'm hearing this.
Yeah, that sounds softer, but you can word it differently and say, oh, I'm experiencing a knowing that blah, blah, blah. So you're not going, I know blah, 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 but you're going, oh, I'm experiencing this. So you're saying it's more psychic information.
I love that. I love that approach. Thank you for sharing that. What would you say what would you tell people if they were just starting out on this journey of tapping into their psychic abilities more, and maybe wanting to go further down this? How would you take them to step onto the path?
I would say start with meditation, because that's one of the best ways to start building your energy and start sensitizing yourself to energy, as well as quietening the mind a little bit and working with visualization. So it gets things moving. It's a really good place to start from. And then I would say you can really focus on grounding and protections and psychic hygiene and energy management first. You're drawn, because it will allow you to work from the base up. And I would say at the very start, get a basic understanding of the energy centers and the chakra system, because that's what energy is, right? And so that's what you'll work with. And then you can deepen from there. I'm a big advocate for training, because I do see a lot of people out there, because intuition is so psychic readings, mediumship, everything, it's so unregulated. This whole field, the spiritual field and sector, is so unregulated that you can, just pick up some cards and go, I'm a psychic reader now. But at the same time, I like to remind people of the deep karmic responsibility that you have to know what you're doing. And so it can have a really big impact on people's lives if you share information that's not meant to be shared, or information that actually wasn't right for them. And so I find to be integrity with that, it's really about knowing your levels and the information and how to interpret it, so you can be sure of what you're saying, so that you can also articulate it in a way that's not going to collapse their timeline. So that's where I'm a really big fan of training. So I trained with Benjamin, as I said before, and also with all of Sharon's studies that we've both done as well, very much about connecting with yourself and your intuition. So that's, for anyone that doesn't know, Sharon Bolt from Shamanic Energy Training and the Temple of Mythical Magic. So I'm so grateful to my teachers. But everyone's got their own process, and it might be that for some people you might need to go on your own journey for a little bit, or do little bits and pieces here and there before stepping into full psychic development. Or some people might need to go straight into it, and that was me. So everyone's energy is different, and you'll work in different ways. Some people might want to read for a little while first, because people work well in that way, and then they might want to step into development. So it just depends, and you kind of feel that pull when it's time, and you'll kind of know and go, oh, okay, I need more training on this now. It's time.
Yeah. And I think like Sharon touches on this a lot, but it's like that consent thing with people as well is the thing that come to my mind. Like, just don't go out there to the world and be like, you get this, you get that.
100%. It's 100%. And so that's what we call psychic Tourette's sometimes, when you just information that's coming through because you're so excited it's coming through, but it might not be what the other person wants to hear. They might not be ready, and they might not have consented. And so never tune into someone's energy field if they haven't consented you to do so. But information might accidentally come in, and that's not your fault, but it's also up to you whether or not you say that, and you've always got to ask for permission. So I massively state that with all of my students, with mediumship as well. If there's a spirit coming through, don't go up to your friend and go, your dad's here. More say, what's your beliefs in life after death, and start going down that path, see if they're open, and then say, oh, I have a spirit here, do you mind if I share a message? Are you open to that? And if it's no, it's a no. That's it.
Respect that.
100%.
So true. I love that. I have some questions for you. Where's my question master here? i.e. my iPhone. All right. What is your sun, moon, and rising sign?
So my sun is Aries. My moon is Libra, so the exact opposite. And
very balanced.
And I have a Capricorn rising.
Oh, you're a Capricorn rising. I didn't know that.
I am. But my node is Scorpio. And when I look at my charts, because I've gotten a bit more into astrology this year, I find it fascinating.
Me too.
And I really just have, I think it's 4 main planets, where I've got 3 planets in each, and that's it. 4 main star signs, where it's just Capricorn, Pisces, Aries, and Scorpio, and then 1 Libra on the side.
So I was talking to my sister about this the other day. Someone mentioned it to me at a party, and then of course I was like, what is this? And we were talking about stelliums. Have you heard of stelliums?
No.
It's where you have more than 3 planets or 3 in one house. And so then you have like a really key aspect in that house that you need to like work through and work on in this life. And so I have 3 in my 5th house, I think it is, which I think is it Capricorn? Might be Capricorn. I'm not sure. But since you said you got lots of like main things in.
Yeah, definitely.
What's your human design?
I am so bad at this. I think I'm a manifesting generator, but that's all I know.
Yeah, that's right.
I got a reading, but it hasn't landed for me yet. Systems, sometimes I love them, sometimes they don't make sense yet. Yeah. But I think it's a fascinating way to work and see the world.
It goes a bit over my head, and I've even had readings, and I've even had a human design person on the podcast, and still it goes over my head a little bit.
It's totally over my head. I've had a great reading from an amazing friend, but Nathan, he's a great reader. I think Nathan Kinesiology, if you look him up. But it just went over my head. I don't get it yet. He's a great reader. Just my brain can't understand it yet, and that's okay.
The first time I heard about it was so many years ago, and I was like, what? And they were like, you're a projector. I don't know what that means. What's your favorite fruit?
Favorite fruit is watermelon.
That's so funny. I was going to eat watermelon before this podcast, but I had a smoothie instead. I'm going to have it after this though.
Yeah.
If you could return to one moment in your life and re-experience it again, what moment would you return to?
That would be when I was living on the beach in India when I was 19, and just waking up in a hut on the beach and just running straight into the ocean and spending my days like that. It was a very quiet beach coastal town with only a few guest houses on the beach, and it was just bliss. And we just have bonfires on the beach every night, swim all day and eat amazing food, and that was life. And I just hula hoop all day in the jungle.
I love it.
My idea of heaven.
Hula hooping every day in the jungle. I'll join you. Forest or the ocean?
Ocean.
Yeah.
100%.
But a very close to the forest though. You're such a forest being.
I am, but I can't go past water.
Yeah, I feel you. What plant or flower do you work with the most? If you're happy to share.
I would say cacao.
Yeah.
But also flower-wise would probably be geranium. I love her.
Ooh, I love my mom is obsessed with geranium.
I love
I
geranium.
haven't worked with her that much. Like I love the essential oil, but
She's
my
amazing.
father one. Oh, so cool. What does she do you feel like is the main teaching that she
For
gives you?
me, it's working on the heart, but also opening up to community. Just depends, because she merges with all other plants, right? And you can smell different geranium plants, and some will smell like chocolate, some will smell like peppermint, some will smell like pepper, some will smell like lemon. So she can just merge and connect. She's got all her beautiful flowers, and she grows like crazy. So she's very strong, but she's strong from the heart because she
I
opens
love
up.
it. Oh, that's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. What's your favorite crystal?
Favorite crystal? I would say obsidian. Especially after doing Empress and the Dragon.
OG.
It's just, it's been my crystal of choice over and over and over again.
Yeah. If you're an animal, what would you be?
Oh, that's a big one. I would probably be, well, this is a mythical creature, but a dragon. But animal wise, a tiger.
Yeah.
Yeah, a big cat. I love
a tiger. An orange tiger or a white tiger?
Orange.
Yeah, I feel it. I feel it. Is there anything you want to add that we feel like we haven't covered in the conversation?
Not so much. You've asked amazing questions. So thank you so much for having me on here and opening up so many poignant pathways and doorways, because you've asked really great questions that often come up with my students and in the Q&As a lot as well. So it's such an honor to be here. I will say for anyone listening that I have a few spaces left in Psychic Foundations, which is the psychic development course that I teach online via Zoom. That runs on Monday nights, but it's all recorded if you can't make it. And so get in touch if you are called to that work. We start on January the 31st for this intake, and I think there's 3 or 2 spaces left. And
it goes for 3 months?
It goes for 6 months.
6 months. Yeah. Wow. Sounds very exciting. And Monday night every week or once a month?
Every week, but then once a month it'll be the mentoring sessions, the one-on-one mentoring sessions instead of the class. So every second month you'll have a night off, so to speak. Cool. I love it. That sounds epic. Yeah. I'm sure many people will be interested. And so if someone wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that? Just through my website, which is eloisefielkeintuitive.com. And I will spell it out because everyone gets confused with my last name, EloiseFielke, intuitive.com. And so you can get in touch with me there, or on Instagram, it's the same name, Eloise Fielke Intuitive, or on Facebook. So whatever your preferred method is. And I'll pop it in the notes. So if you can't remember what we said, just check it out there and you can find Eloise's website and all of her details. Thank you so much for coming on my podcast. Of course. It is such a pleasure and a joy after years of knowing you and being friends. We get to connect today, which is so special. So thank you so much for having me. So fun. Thank you, Eloise.